Hello, friends. About a year ago, almost exactly, I sat right here in this chair, in front of this bookshelf, and recorded a video about something that was just starting to happen. And that something was called Tesla Takedown. It's kind of crazy to think back. It's been a wild year since then. We haven't heard the word Doge as much since Elon Musk left office, and in fact, in some ways, Elon Musk has retreated from the focus of political discourse. But Tesla Takedown is still here. We're entering our second year. I think stronger than ever, and I just wanted to take a moment to just reflect on the last year, and sort of update the strategic outlook that I outlined in a video last year. And before I do that, I just want to say I don't speak for anyone other than myself. I'm proud to consider myself part of Tesla Takedown, but I don't speak for the movement, for the organization. I'm just speaking for myself here. So it's important to talk about what's changed and what hasn't, right? My bookshelf hasn't changed. I think I'm still wearing the same hoodie as I was last year, but as I said, a lot has changed, and I think it's really important to understand the situation, and why Elon Musk continues to be, and I think this is the critical point I was trying to make a year ago, is vulnerable, as well as someone who's really important for us to confront. One of the things that has changed since last year is that we continue to learn more. And this has been the case with Elon Musk for a long time. You think back 10 years ago when I first started covering Tesla, the way he was perceived was just built on these PR narratives that he successfully managed to put out there. And as time has gone on, we've learned more and more about who he really is. And that has certainly been the case over the last year and will continue to be over the course of 2026. I think it's one of the most important things to emphasize here is that we're learning now the horrible cost of his participation in government about a year ago. Specifically, the decision to cut USAID, which I think inspired a lot of us to go out into the streets and in front of our local Tesla stores and protest. And I think one of the horrible things that we've learned is that indeed the cost in human lives of Elon Musk's decisions, his gleeful. I think he put it as feeding USAID to the wood chipper. He bragged about that, just not quite a year ago. And in the meantime, we've learned, and the estimates vary here, but conservatively, it looks like hundreds of thousands. I'm looking at estimates of 1 million plus dead people between the loss of humanitarian aid, food aid, people dying of starvation. And the loss of medical aid, addressing all the various diseases that continue to run rampant around the world. Not only are we looking about 1 million, maybe 1.6 million, according to some estimates, of people who just died just in the last. It hasn't even been a whole year since these cuts took place, and most of those deaths are children and vulnerable people. So I think it's, I don't think any of us need to be convinced that Elon Musk is a bad person, but I think we've learned and continue to learn more and more, the horrible cost of letting him continue to rampage across our society and the need to put a stop to him. Other things that is just becoming more clear about him. The Guardian just reported every single day in January now, he's posted something about race and his growing obsession with racism and white supremacy. Again, this is something that 10 years ago, I don't think, I certainly, as a major Elon Musk critic, I did not predict that he would become the world's leading figurehead for white supremacy. I just didn't. I knew he was a bad guy a long time ago, but I continue to be shocked at the depths to which he's descended. And frankly, his determination to drag us all down with him. And I think specifically you look at X, the Everything app, and he is trying to use that, and also Grok, his large language model, and his work in AI. He's made it very clear in his comments that he sees those, both the social media platform and the AI stuff that he's doing, as it's very clear ways to promote his worldview, which are just increasingly unvarnished racism and white supremacy. And so we continue to learn more about what a bad guy he is. The other piece is the Epstein files, which I've been currently looking at myself, and I've written one blog post. I'm working on a series of those over at niedermeyer.online. I think as the weeks and months unfold ahead of us. We're going to continue to learn more about his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein, and it's going to cast new light on his who this person really is. And it's not good news. It's bad. There's a reason this stuff is being covered up, has been covered up. And so, we're going to continue to learn what a bad person Elon Musk was and is. And again, I don't think, anyone watching this video probably doesn't need to be convinced of this, but I think it is important to update from a year ago that, everything that we've learned, if anything, the openness with which he is sort of, his badness, this horrible impact, again, hundreds of thousands to million plus people dead, the open racism, all of it. I think it's just more and more motivation to do something about that, about the situation. Which of course brings us to, the main thrust of why I recorded a video a year ago and what I hope to sort of update today, which is, my main point is not necessarily that he's bad. Again, he is, right? This is important, but he's vulnerable. That was the main point of my video a year ago, and that continues to be the point that I want to emphasize here. It's not just that he's bad; it's that he's bad, and we can do something about it. And I think that the degree of badness that he is responsible for demands that we continue to do something about it, especially given that we have that opportunity. And I think it's important to look back over the last year and look at what we accomplished. The scale of protests in the U.S. and around the world is itself a huge, at Tesla stores, a huge accomplishment. But if you look at Tesla's business, their automotive revenues last year dropped 10% globally. Now, that doesn't sound like much. A 10% drop sounds like something that might happen in the course of normal business. It's actually a pretty significant drop. Automotive sales in general are very sticky. It's very hard for them to move up or down. I mean, I've watched, things, General Motors ignition scandal a few years back, if you remember that, the Toyota sudden intended acceleration scandal. These things didn't really impact sales much. It's actually very hard, the way that car sales work, for these sorts of scandals to really have much of an impact. And we are, in the course of modern automotive history, I certainly can't think of an example of a scandal or of a social movement that's been able to impact automotive sales the way that Tesla Takedown has. And so I think that's a huge accomplishment. I think everybody who's been out there protesting, organizing, telling their friends and family not to buy Teslas, you really accomplished something. The other thing, the context that's important to understand here, because again, 10% doesn't sound like enough, and obviously we want more, but you have to understand this was in a year. So, it was about a year after Tesla's first completely new product, the Cybertruck, which is like a massive flop. It's, as far as I can tell, the biggest, certainly the biggest automotive flop of the 21st century, maybe in automotive history. I recently heard from a supplier, someone who works at a supplier, that Tesla made their suppliers tool up so to supply components to build 120,000 units of the Cybertruck every year. They cumulatively haven't come close to selling that. I think it's something like 40, 50,000 cumulatively. So over multiple years of sales, that their first brand new, high profile, flashy, what you call a halo product in the auto industry. Not just a standard product, but one that's really supposed to build the company's image, is an absolute disaster. And so, these supplier companies that went in with Tesla to help build the Cybertruck, they're losing money because they tooled up to the number of the amount of volume that Tesla asked them to. They're losing money. And I think that's a really important message to the industry, right? That if you partner with Tesla on their new products, they're going to tell you it's going to sell a certain amount, but it won't. And you're going to be the one who takes it in the shorts as a result of that. Tesla is too, but all of these supplier companies are as well. And so I think, this is one of these things that as, normal people, we don't understand that impact. And that is a very meaningful impact because it affects how other suppliers in the future think about whether or not they want to go into business with Tesla on their new models. The other thing that's really important to understand, the context for that 10% drop globally, is that, this was also in a year when Tesla facelifted its most mass market product, right? So the Model Y is now, and Tesla, really works to be non-transparent about its sales data, but the Model Y is very clearly like the overwhelming majority of Tesla's car business is one car. The Model 3 is older, and the Model Y is kind of crossover. That's the meat of the car market globally. And they updated it. Now, it doesn't look, I mean, I don't like how it looks. I don't think it's an improvement. You may have seen it with the bar light in the front and in the back, kind of trying to make it look a little bit more like the Cybertruck. when you do that, when you update a new model, that costs the company money, and they do it because it improves sales, right? Like the old model was getting old, and so they had to refresh it, and typically this gives quite a decent boost to sales. And so the fact that in the year that Tesla facelifted its most mass market model, that sales actually went down 10%, automotive revenues went down 10%, is huge. Like that's really important context for understanding it, because that new model, that refreshed model, should have increased sales. And not only did we hold it flat, but we got it down. And so I think, everybody who's gone out there and all of us have wondered at times, especially I think in February and March when we're out there in the rain and the cold, are we making an impact? Over the course of the last year, you did make an impact. Pat yourself on the back and stay at it, because it's working. I especially want to shout out, this is a global movement. We've been focused on the U.S. and our own cities, I think a lot of us, but this is a global movement. I have to shout out the folks in the UK in particular for being, but also Germany. I mean, we've seen Tesla takedown protests around the world, and in Europe in particular, you're seeing, Tesla's sales fall much, much, much more dramatically, 30, 40, 50% in a lot of countries. I think for us in the U.S., that is aspirational, right? It shows what's possible. And it motivates us, I think, to go out and continue to keep our foot on this thing. But I have to give credit to the folks in Europe. They're really having the impact that we hope to see. Just in January, too, China is the biggest market for electric cars. And we've seen now this Tesla sales in China, and it's lumpy. It's a little hard to say for sure what the big picture trends are, because they build cars in China both for the domestic market and also to export. We're seeing in January some real big drops in demand there. We know obviously the Chinese EV business is the best in the world, and Tesla's struggling to compete with them. And it looks like what's happening now is demand, again, that facelifted model bumped sales a little bit, but that's fallen off. And now Tesla is really having to use that Shanghai factory that is really the heart of their car business to export instead of just selling into the Chinese market, which, in theory should be an amazing growth opportunity, considering it is the biggest market for EVs. What's important to understand about that export shift, and again, this may be a short-term thing, it may be a longer-term thing. The context I want to put this in is for our friends to the north in Canada, because right now, Canada has agreed to let in more Chinese cars. Well, the number one Chinese imported car in Canada is Tesla. And I think what's going to happen here is the weakness in the Chinese market. Canada is one of the only markets where Tesla really can make up some of that volume, and especially do so profitably. And so I would really encourage our friends in Canada to double down at this point and to really understand, your market is one of the battlegrounds. Keeping that Chinese factory, if the Shanghai factory can't be a viable business, the European factory is in trouble. They're trying to support it by exporting to India. That's not going to work. They have labor problems there as well. Europe continues to be the hardest place for Tesla to operate. But in China, if they can push that volume into Canada and people buy those cars, that keeps the sort of the heart of their business going. And so I think Canada, I want to flag Canada as a major battleground for Tesla takedown in 2026, because that is they need to sell those Chinese-made cars. I know there's a lot of concerns about Chinese-made cars in all countries in Europe and in the U.S. and Canada. There are security issues. There are privacy issues. I don't want to get into that too much because it's like 5 videos right there. But what I want to emphasize here is that Tesla, any concern you could raise about a Chinese car coming into whether it's Canada or the U.S., you could raise it about Tesla. And I think specifically in terms of data, privacy and data, Tesla has all these cameras on all these cars. If you look at their privacy policies, they are not good. And certainly in the U.S., regardless of whether they're made in Canada or not, I think the question of is Tesla sharing that data with ICE, with Border Patrol, with other federal agencies that are involved in some of the really awful stuff we see going on is a really important question. But even if they're not, Reuters reporting has shown that Tesla is terrible at safeguarding their data, and that, frankly, I don't know of any Chinese companies that have a proven data privacy issue that's as bad as what we know, what's been reported about Tesla. So I'm not telling people not to worry about Chinese cars. What I'm saying is just because it doesn't have a Chinese brand on it doesn't mean it's not made in China, just Tesla. But also it's really important to understand, we need to worry about data privacy and things like that because of who's on the other side of that. And what we've learned is Elon Musk runs Tesla. I mean, it's his little private fiefdom. There's no independent corporate governance that constrains him. And we know that he's a raging racist and pro mass deportation. So the concerns that folks have around Chinese cars, I would point them at Tesla, and I would urge our friends in Canada in particular not to see Tesla as a better Chinese car. If you're concerned about your national sovereignty, for sure, right? I mean, Donald Trump presents a much clearer threat to Canadian sovereignty than anybody in China does at this point. So, just a message I want to get to our friends in Canada, because I think what's happening there is really important. Meanwhile, one of the really important things, we've talked before about, I talked in the last video a year ago about the stock price of Tesla. About Tesla's stock price is the foundation of Elon Musk's whole empire. And it's because, it's the one area where he can transform his ability to inflate values into that it's liquid, right? He can sell it, he can leverage it for loans. That's the heart of his business. And one of the challenges has been, and I remember saying this, a year ago, was, we got to chip away at the car sales. The car sales are the foundation of all of it, because that's what the business depends on. And that has not changed at all. And what I said a year ago was, we have to chip away at that with the understanding that, it may take a while for the stock price to catch up with that, right? That car sales may go down. The stock price is sort of always been sort of a little bit independent of the fundamentals of Tesla as a company. And, that continues to be the case to some extent, for sure. But what I want to flag is that, again, this depends day to day, week to week. Things happen. I think the stock goes up, the stock goes down. But from January to January, from January 2025 to January 2026, the stock's basically flat to down. So it's gone up, it's gone down. It's always a roller coaster, but it's flat. And this is really, really important because Tesla stock is sort of narrative fueled, and it's not really tied to, how many cars Tesla sold, what their profit margin was, and those sort of business fundamentals. It's a momentum. It's what's called a momentum stock. And so when the stock is doing well, it tends to do better because people see it doing well. They think it will continue to do well. They buy the stock, that sends it up. And it's this self-reinforcing mechanism, right? And that's what allows the Tesla's valuation to float totally free of any of the fundamentals as a business. The fact that over the last year it's been flat, again, I'd love to see worse, right? I think we all would have loved to have seen, that stock go down, the scenario that I outlined a year ago where that dynamic reverses and fear takes over and people sell because they see it going down. It's going to take some time to get there. But the fact that we've held that stock flat is actually a huge accomplishment, because that's the start of losing that momentum. And once they lose the momentum, and if the business is going down and the stock isn't going up, there's only one way for this to go. So I think we're doing really well. And I think the stock price, we can affect the car stuff, car sales, I think to some extent fairly easily. The stock is harder. Although I also want to shout out everybody with Tesla Takedown who's been contacting, their government agencies, their pensions, everybody who invests in the stock and urging them to divest. That's a huge part of this. And let's absolutely keep the pressure up on that front. I also want to update sort of the state of Tesla, of Elon Musk's broader empire, because, I outlined a year ago in my video, that Tesla is the foundation for the rest of his whole empire. And, in terms of valuation, the rest of his empire is huge and as big or collectively bigger than Tesla. But Tesla is the foundation of it because it's the only real business, and it's the only real way that he can convert those valuations into actual liquidity by either selling or borrowing against the stock. That continues to be the case, but what's really interesting is what's happened in the rest of the empire over the last year. And I'll just give you a quick sort of update. And what happened was X, so formerly Twitter, the social media platform that he dumped all of his cash really that he pulled out of Tesla into, continues to be kind of a basket case. We don't know much about it because it's privately held, but clearly it wasn't doing so well because he rolled it into XAI, which is his AI startup, and put it all together. The reason he did that is because, again, I'm interpreting as best I can without having real visibility into the nuts and bolts of these businesses. But XAI has been able to raise cash. In fact, they just closed a $20 billion round. I'll talk about that in a sec. But they're able to raise cash on the market. They're able to do the Elon Musk thing of, raise more money with the hype story, raise the valuation, bring cash in, and cover up for the fact that the business isn't really there. And he's doubled down on that by rolling X, which also doesn't have a functioning business, into it. And so that was a bailout, right? He's doing that because, the investors in X already, like they did so, they invested in X thinking like he would, grow the users or he would work his Elon Musk magic. And the reality is like X is much worse off than it was a year ago or 2 years ago, or certainly before he bought it. And so he has to, but he also can't raise money for it because he has no narrative around it. There's no story that will convince people that X is going to go from being this, sort of Nazi and whatever, like hellscape, to something that is growing and healthy again. Like there's no story that he can sell there. And so he had to roll it into XAI where he did have a story that Grok was going to, become whatever, artificial general intelligence and become a machine god and whatever else, which is a silly narrative, but at least that's a narrative that can be sold right now. And so this shows the weakness in the rest of his empire, right? That he's having to roll it together. Well, he's actually taking that one step further now and taking that, right? So you have X, you have XAI, and then he's rolled all of that into SpaceX, which he's now preparing to go public with. So this is really interesting because it shows, again, these businesses are not supporting themselves. He's having to roll them together, not because they make sense as businesses together, but because he can sort of pick parts of them to build these stories that he uses to fundraise off of. And if they're all sort of lumped together, it creates really what has been going on all along, which is really that, he sells, it's really like a meme coin, these cryptocurrencies that we saw, gain crazy amounts of value, whether it's Dogecoin or any of the rest of them. These are not based on cash flows or any kind of fundamental economics. They're based on sentiment. And so he's rolling all these companies together so that they're harder to understand as businesses and easier to turn into these sort of meme coin-like narratives. And so that's what's happening. And so now it's really almost all of the rest of his actual empire is being rolled into SpaceX, which now is going to go public. And that's gonna be interesting because he's gonna have to start to then disclose the financials of these businesses, which it's not gonna look good. And he's doing this because for the exact reason that I made this video a year ago, which was that the foundation of his whole empire, all of these hundreds of billions, $1 trillion valuations, rest on a foundation of Tesla car sales. And it really is on Tesla stock, which then, rests ultimately to some extent on Tesla's car sales. That is not a sustainable corporate structure. It wasn't a year ago. It's not today. And he's rolling all of the rest of his empire into this SpaceX stock that he's then going to float on the public market because he needs another source of liquidity. It's because, he understands the strategy that I laid out a year ago, which was that, when Tesla was the only foundation, that was like the exhaust port on the Death Star. And if we target that, we can bring the whole thing down. He is now trying to, by taking SpaceX public, broaden that foundation. Now, not in a meaningful way, because again, SpaceX, it's not going to have like the business fundamentals that are going to allow it to really provide a more stable base. But by taking it public and having another source of liquidity, he does have the opportunity to pull cash out, and maybe, I don't know, start another narrative, a new hype, move on to the next thing. It's so hard to predict with him, but the fact that he's doing this completely reinforces the overall strategy. And I think for us, it really puts the onus on us to really get aggressive around this because, once that company goes public, once he has another source of liquidity, again, in the long run, it won't make a difference, but it will sort of prop things up for another year or two, or maybe in theory, a little longer. So I think, we were right about his vulnerability. He is trying to address it. He doesn't have anything that actually, will put his whole business on a sound footing. And so we need to keep our foot down on this thing. And just to illustrate, how little he has, this whole SpaceX thing and merging it with XAI, the narrative that he has now, this is the new pivot, right? It was EVs and sustainable energy and self-driving and cars and now it's evolved to AI, and now it's AI in space, and his narrative is, right, we're gonna put AI data centers in space. There's a lot going on with this. The one simple thing I think that is important to understand, because it shows how absurd this all is, and that silly, obviously, things that can very obviously be proven wrong are propping up like $1 trillion valuations here. You know, you can put a GPU, a computer processor, up in space, sure, and there's solar energy. That sounds great, and you link it together with satellites, it's Starlink and all that. Sounds good. What happens with the heat that the AI processor puts off, which they all do, and a lot of people, it's just very, and this is what Elon relies on, is that people think, well, it's outer space, it's cold up there, it's cold and dark, like, of course the heat just dissipates, right? Of course. Except think about a vacuum thermos. When you have a thermos, and whether you're putting something hot or cold in it, what keeps it hot or cold? It's a vacuum. Just like in space, the vacuum of space. You surround a hot beverage with a vacuum, and the heat doesn't go anywhere because a vacuum is an insulator and not a conductor. And so actually the whole vision for bringing AI and space together is completely absurd. Maybe 20, I don't know, maybe like a lot of money and time will come up with some kind of solution to it. But the idea that it's ready to go is absolutely absurd. But it's a narrative that he can sell because people nod their head and say, oh yeah, right, it's cold in space. Like the cooling is free, the energy is free. He's a genius. He's not a genius. The idea doesn't work. It won't work. And he's only doing it because he needs to put these pieces of his empire together to prop it up and to give himself another source of liquidity, because he knows Tesla's failing. The core business is failing. And by the way, the autonomous vehicles and the robots that are supposed to transform that business are no closer than they were a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago. I was in Austin in June. I looked at their robotaxi situation there. It's a performance. It's a demonstration. It's a more sophisticated demonstration than they've done in the past. But Teslas are not all about to drive themselves. And this is just the endless end of the year stuff. So, as we look at 2026, as we look at taking Tesla Takedown into its second year, I think some things have really changed, but some things have really stayed the same. And I think what has stayed the same, or if anything grown, is both the need and the opportunity to address one of the most malignant entities in our society and certainly in our politics. I think it's really important to understand that not all politics is about voting. We can transform the political landscape. Obviously voting is important. I'm not telling anyone not to vote, but I think the vision for me of Tesla Takedown and targeting Elon Musk is that we can create transformative change without any real electoral steps there, that his vulnerability allows us to potentially topple him and create a new reality in which he can no longer, through fraud and deception, buy elections for people like Donald Trump and kill, use the power of the US government to kill hundreds of thousands, over 1 million people. So I'm certainly more motivated than ever. I've been busy with books and other projects, but I'm excited to get back out and start protesting again. Luckily here in Portland, ICE and Tesla are right next door, so we can kind of protest both at the same time. But I hope this has been helpful in sort of updating the strategic outlook for Tesla Takedown. I want to finish by thanking everybody who sort of came together in this spontaneous moment a year ago, recognized what a dangerous person this really is, and recognized the opportunity to create real, meaningful, and lasting change by taking him down. And I know it seems like it's still far off. There is still a lot to do, but that he is as vulnerable as ever. And I think if you can imagine what a future without Elon Musk looks like, it can only be better. And I think that's something that's really worth fighting for. So thanks for your time today.